Hey, welcome back to the channel for another video. In this video, we're going to be talking analytics. We're going to be talking about Microsoft's unified analytics platform, better known as Azure Synapse. Now, inside that, we're going to be looking at something called pools. And yes, I'm going to refrain from all the swimming analogies that I can think of, but by the end of this, you're going to know what pools are and why you use each one of them. So with that, I think it's about time, let's get started. Okay, so here we are inside the Azure portal. More importantly, I'm in my Synapse Analytics workspace. Now, when I'm talking about pools, what am I talking about? Well, let's go inside the interface and I'm gonna go down to this one here. When I go to manage, inside of here, we're gonna see 3 analytics pools up in the top left-hand corner. So the first is our SQL pool, the next is our Apache Spark pool, and lastly, I've got my Data Explorer pool. The question that should be going through your head, especially when you get to this point, is what are all of them? And how do I use each one? And more importantly, why should I be using each one? So that's what we're gonna cover in this video. Okay, let's switch back to the presentation and let's start going through it. All right, so let's talk about those pools that we had there. We had 3 of them, right? So I want to go back to the start of the video when I mentioned the phrase unified analytics platform. By unified, I mean, well, it's kind of like a brain for the analytics estate that Azure Synapse provides. That brain can speak multiple languages. And that means that you can use what you love to use on a daily basis. We can kind of group those languages into 3 different areas, and that's where the pools come in. So the first area is Apache Spark related, and that's the Apache Spark pool. The next one is in the T-SQL side of things, and that's called the SQL pool. The last part of the brain is the KQL or Custos Query Language part, which is the Data Explorer pool. So those are the 3 parts of the brain, and let's talk about each one and what the choices are that you're going to have to make. So when speaking about the Apache Spark pool, there's really 2 things that there's basically 2 things that you're gonna have to decide through. One is the PySpark versus Spark SQL. Which one are you gonna be using? The other thing to take note of is the Spark version on Synapse is currently 3.1, not the latest of 3.2.1. 3.1 is what's been GA'd. If we go across to the other part of the brain, which is the SQL side, well, T-SQL is the language that a lot of people love to use today. It's been used by people in the Microsoft world, and it's used in things like Azure SQL Server and SQL Server on-premise, and there's not really the language choice in there, but what is inside there is the engine mode. So you can either choose serverless or dedicated SQL. Now, if you choose a dedicated SQL server, that means that you're actually provisioning a server and provisioning a bunch of compute to be available all the time. Doesn't matter if you're not querying it, etc., it's going to be online. You can, of course, set schedules to turn it on and off, and that's absolutely what you should be doing. Now, in the case that you actually want to pay per query, well, you would use something called serverless, and that's what serverless allows. So every time you run a query, that's what you're going to pay for. So that's serverless. Let's go across to KQL now. Well, the Data Explorer pool, there's not many choices here. I just wanted to talk about that. So you can do streaming inside of here. You'll also notice that you can do batch as well, analytics. It's really good for both. Think large scale analytics and also think it's great for time series analysis. So it's got things like anomaly detection already built into it. And they've done a ton of effort to bring a whole bunch of machine learning things related to time series into that part of the brain. Now, the KQL language, it's similar to PowerShell. That's what it looks like. And that's why it is very familiar to a lot of people who are in the infrastructure world. So we've got these 3 parts of the brain, and that's why it's a unified analytics platform, because you can use whatever you want to use. Now let's talk about the smarts that Synapse provides. Well, the smarts that Synapse provides, when we look at this Spark pool and we look at this SQL pool, it actually synchronizes between the 2. And what happens is basically the tables that get made in your Lake database or your Apache Spark pools actually get replicated over to your serverless SQL, which means that you can query them how you would normally query your Spark SQL tables. Now, or I should say how you would query your normal SQL, your SQL serverless tables. Now, the only thing I'll say, it's a bit tricky to set up. You got to make sure you've got to have it set up the right way, and that's why I ask you to reach out to me, because I do it for customers on a daily basis, and that's probably the tricky part in Synapse. But let's talk about the next level of smarts. There's something also called Synapse Link. Synapse Link allows your serverless SQL pool and your Apache Spark world, part of the brain, to talk to either Cosmos DB or to Dataverse. Dataverse is what Dynamics and that part of the family for Microsoft the Power Platform write out to. These makes the tables in Dataverse or Cosmos readily available, like the link that I talked about before, in either Spark or T-SQL, which is really nice. Now, this is probably why you see that it's 3.1 for Spark over on the Synapse side. That's why I suspect it. There's a lot of effort that goes into this engineering of Azure Synapse to bring things and bring that level of smarts to you, which honestly you couldn't go without. So that's basically those two sides. Now what I want to talk about is Azure Synapse is really smart, but where does it stack up to its competitors? So we can kind of think of its competitors in the three different pools. So if we go to the Apache Spark part of the brain, I'll wait a couple of seconds. What do you think it is? Well, it's Azure Databricks, or I should just say Databricks. Databricks is usually the one which is compared to for this Spark side of the brain. The difference, I'll say, Databricks is on 3.2.1. It's always going to have the latest bleeding edge for Spark. Azure Synapse is always going to lag behind, and that's just because they have so much smarts that they're bringing to you in terms of that synchronization. If we go to the second part of the brain, which is SQL, what do we compare inside there? Well, it's not so much about the language again. Think of it kind of as an enterprise data warehouse. That's the tip I'll give. One of the ones which comes up a lot is Snowflake. So I kind of put Snowflake in that part 2 of the brain. Now part 3 of the brain, well, it's got PowerShell kind of support. I don't really know a competitor for it. I challenge the community to, if you do find one, write it in the comments below and we can inform everyone about it. But this is where I come to the advantage of Synapse. It's about giving you access to whatever you want to use. Whether you want that Spark side of the brain, whether you want that PowerShell side of the brain, or whether you want that T-SQL side of the brain, it's got you covered across all three. And that's why Microsoft calls it the Unified Analytics Platform. Now, one exception to this video, I would say, if you were watching carefully, I didn't speak about how KQL accesses that smarts across on the left. The underpinning of Azure Synapse, and you'll notice that when you provision your Synapse, is that everything is built on top of data lake storage. So when you write out your tables, you're going to be writing them to Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and then that's going to be ready in, and that's the glue that holds Azure Synapse together. So with that, we've gone through all the pools. I'm hoping that you know what each of them mean. I think it's about time. Let's recap and summarize. Alright, so recap time. In this video, we spoke about analytics. Well, we spoke about one of the services in Azure that you'll use inside your analytics estate in Azure. Now, what that was Azure Synapse. We talked about pools. Now, if you remember, think of Azure Synapse as a brain. There's three parts of that brain. There's a Apache Spark, there's a SQL, and there's a Data Explorer part to the brain. Each one of them gave you access to different languages. So think Spark SQL, PySpark on Apache Spark, T-SQL on the SQL pool, and then KQL, which gives a language like PowerShell, on the third part of the brain in Data Explorer. The other thing we talked about was what are the different choices you're going to make, and then we also talked about the competitors. So I'm hoping that now you're much more comfortable with Azure Synapse when it comes to choosing around the pools. If you're not, and you still want to know more info, or you just want to have help setting up Azure Synapse, feel free to reach out and you can get that organized. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there for this video, hoping that you liked it. If you did, please go ahead and give this video a like, and also hit the subscribe button because I'm sure you want to see more videos on analytics coming in the future. It's with that I'm going to sign out for this one, and I'll see you in the next one.